everyone, and for roll call, appointment of alternates. Charles, would you serve for one of our many vacancies?
Sure.
And we have no public hearings, so I move on to old business application number 17-23 of Giuliano's Pool LLC, applicant Christine Wynn Long, owner, for the construction of an in-ground swimming pool on the property located at 25 Timber Ridge Drive, Assessor's Map F06, Block 306, Lot 029, Zone R40. Good evening.
How are you?
Hi.
Okay.
Would you like to state your name for the record?
Eric Levesque with Giuliano's Pools.
Thank you. Would you like to make a presentation? What you plan to do?
We plan on digging an 18 by 36 rectangle in-ground swimming pool at 2.5 Timber Ridge. We hit a couple snags with some wetlands, and we're willing to pretty much do whatever you want us to do to prevent erosion into these said wetlands.
What's the pool going to be made of? Is it
Galvanized
fiberglass,
steel,
steel,
and it's a vinyl liner.
and a vinyl liner?
Correct.
Okay. So it comes as a single piece?
It does not. It comes in 8-foot steel sections, or 4-foot steel sections. It's just steel panels 42 inches tall by whatever length we need it to be.
And then you assemble it on site?
We do.
Okay. But you don't need any heavy equipment for that assembly, per se?
For the assembly, we do not.
Okay, just the dig.
Correct.
Is it welded?
It's not. It's bolted together with galvanized nuts and bolts.
Uh-huh. Okay. How deep is the pool going to be?
We decided on 8 feet deep.
7.
7, we did go up. We did go up that foot, so we're 7 feet deep.
7 feet deep. Okay. So how deep a hole do you have to dig to install a 7-foot deep pool?
7 foot 2 inches, and then we bring this vermiculite substance in, and we trowel that on the bottom of the pool before we place the liner on top. We don't just put the liner on top of dirt and the soil.
Okay. One comment that I had was that I looked at your estimate of 100 cubic yards, and based on the dimensions, I didn't see a depth in here, but a depth of 7 feet would be about twice that volume.
It's not just like a 7 foot all down. It would be the 40 inches in height for the steel walls, and then there's the walls angled in to a certain smaller area that's 7 feet deep.
Okay.
So it's not just like a whole section at 7 feet deep. It would go from a shallow end, which is the 40 inches, to the walk-up, we call it, when the level area of the shallow end breaks down and goes to the 7 feet deep.
Okay.
So it's not as much material as you're thinking, just because of how limited the 7 foot part is compared to the size of the pool.
So if it did end up being more volume, would you be able to handle that soil?
We would.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're trucking everything off-site.
Okay. The location is, how far is it from the wetlands?
I don't know if we're all looking at the same paper here. This one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like we're about 25 feet away. 25, 26 feet away.
Okay. And then, so between the pool and the wetland, what's there now?
It's grass now.
Okay, it's like a mowed grass.
It is.
Alright. So I think one of the staff comments had to do with the, is this right, the placement of the silt fence. Immediately, the reason that should be, yeah, that they should be, that the silt fence should be closer to the excavation and to the rest of the work area.
Which is very doable.
Is that, okay.
Just to answer Commissioner Morrison's question on the distance from the mapped wetlands, at the closest point of the pool, it's 20 feet to the edge of the wetland soils based on the mapping that's provided. And that's why, as you said, my concern was if you were to go by this plan, you have some incidental disturbance, but yet you're pushing it to the limit right on the edge of the wetland soils. That's why I said prefer, and I use an arbitrary distance of 10 feet, at least then it gives them enough room to work in the hole, and it gives a little buffer of existing grass to stay, because the backyard is just grassed from property line to property line. So,
What's the wetland like beyond the property line?
when it goes off-site, it gets, it kind of drops topo, and it's more of a forested, some pockets of standing water. I don't want to call it a swamp, but it starts to show that characteristic, and that's as you're going further to, sorry, let me just, bear with me, to the, cardinal direction is not on the map. No, sorry, north. It's right over here. Sorry.
So the property basically has mowed grass to the edge of a more conventional.
It transitions,
woods
yeah,
wetland.
yeah.
What's the elevation change between the wetland and where the pool's gonna go?
Yeah, it looks in this picture to be slightly sloping.
About 3 to 4 feet from, I'm looking at from where it says the 248 to about the center of the pool.
So will you have to build up the downside, or?
We will not have to go that far towards the wetlands to build up, because we're doing minimal patio on that side of the pool. We're only building up, if anything, that where the pool is going itself is basically, it's pretty close, it's within a foot of grade change. So there will be slight filling up on the wetland side, but it won't go nearly as close to the wetlands as, I have the silt fence drawn.
And there's gonna be a lip around the edge of the pool?
A lip,
Or like a concrete walkway or something? around-
there will be a concrete patio around the swimming pool, yes.
Okay, and how far is that gonna go?
On the wetland side,
I'm sorry, that's not part of the 18 by 36, right?
it is not.
No, okay.
On the wetland side, it's gonna be basically just 4 feet.
So one question I had was under the special conditions under item 7, which was that no pool water will be drained into the wetland area, right? So that's if you're draining the pool or you're doing backwashing or anything, so how is that gonna be done on like a regular basis? It said here that if the pool needs to be drained, pool water will be drained into a truck, which removes said water from the site, but if you're just draining water due to, extra rains or anything like that, how is that being handled and not getting into the wetlands?
The actual system is not a backwash system.
Okay.
It's a DE filter.
Okay.
So if there was any lowering of pool water, odds are it would get pumped to the road.
Okay, that's how it's gonna happen now?
Correct.
In the road, it goes into a catch basin, which comes into the wetland.
Pretty much trucked away, that's whatever you want us
That's
to
the
do.
better
at
answer.
the time.
Their narrative for the O&M plan for the pool says it will be trucked away.
Yeah.
So that's why I said for my condition number 7, they've represented to the commission that they will make sure at their best efforts that they will not drain this pool into the wetland soils to the west of the house.
Us as a company will not, but out of our hands and we're not there.
Have a word with your client.
Yeah, having had a pool once, you know, I just think that I can definitely imagine draining the pool, you could easily truck it out, but if you've had 5 inches of rain, you know, to a storm, and you just gotta bring the level down a little bit, how that gets controlled is a standard maintenance issue, and I don't think if you wanna be trucking it every time you wanna do that. So I don't know what that means, you know, and you don't want to go into the wetlands, so I'm trying to think of what the other alternative is.
Well, that rain, where would it go if the pool wasn't there? It would hit the ground and then go,
Well, so I guess the question is,
Downhill
what's
into
in,
the
what's in the pool? I mean, usually you don't want the pool water to go into the wetlands because of, you know, chlorine and anything else that's in it, but this one doesn't have that? So no backwash system or?
there's no backwash system.
Yeah.
It's not a backwash filter.
Okay.
But it is chemically treated.
It is chemically treated though.
It's a mineral system where it's not chlorine tabs, so it has the amount of chlorine that your drinking water would have in the city. You know, it keeps chlorine levels to that lowness.
A small amount of water could be presumably sprayed on the lawn away from the wetland and absorbed that way without jeopardizing the wetland and without dumping it in the street. Yes?
Yes.
So when you go to dig the hole for the pool, are you gonna be able to stage your equipment on the opposite side from where the wetlands are? Opposite side of the pool? I mean, you're not gonna have to bring them around to the west side of the pool along the edge of the wetlands?
It's gonna take a little bit of regrading of the front yard to get trucks up, but yes, it's doable. From the road going up, it's like a sharper bank up, and then it starts to go down.
Uh-huh.
So to get our machines and everything, we'll just have to make a little roadway in that area to stay away from the wetland side.
Is that how you're planning to do it?
It is.
Yeah, okay. Do you have a plan for handling groundwater in the hole?
Yeah, based on, the way we normally do it, is we'll dig the pool and then we'll put stone into the pool to keep the groundwater at bay, and then we'll just drop the line, we'll do the vermiculite, then drop the liner right on that stone.
Doesn't it need to be, relatively dry to be able to dig down to 7 feet? I mean, if you're doing this work in the spring and the wetlands are, 3 feet lower than either pool, you could hit groundwater at like 2 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that you need to dig, 5 feet into the water table.
If that is the scenario,
Yeah.
then yes, we would.
But would you dewater?
Yeah, how would you do that? How would you get the water out?
It's digging down and then putting stone in place of it to keep it
Yeah.
lower, and then put everything up.
Yeah, I mean, my experience with trying to do that, though, is it ends up just turning into a big soupy mess unless you can dewater it.
If it came to having to pump, how would you like us to pump the water from the pool and before we put the liner down to keep it the pressure of the water inside the liner at bay?
If you need to dewater, I want you not to dewater and pump it into the wetland.
Okay. So would you like it trucked, or would you want somebody to consistently haul?
No, I mean, I think it's up to you to come up with a plan, as long as that plan doesn't involve pumping it into the wetlands.
Well, we would normally pump it into the street, if that's what you wanted, but I'm guessing that's going to the wetlands. I don't see another reason or way to make this water disappear besides trucking it out.
The only way I can see is doing it during an extremely dry time of the year.
When do you think you're gonna be doing this?
We're looking for this year to do it.
Okay, like right now?
This season. What-
I think the application said spring, right?
It did, but it all depends on how this goes. The sooner we can do it, we're looking to do it.
Okay. The other issue too is going to be handling that soil. If it's, if the water table is really high like that, and being able to take the saturated soil off-site.
We will be able to, we have the trucking power to do so.
And
Okay,
the-
what kind of a truck would you use?
You guys have,
What they could do if the soil saturated is pursuant to the stormwater manual, set up a basic basin to dewater the spoils from the hole. And staff would recommend that they would do that in the front yard, providing greater separation, but also keeping it near where that route of access, construction access is. They have a temporary stockpile just to the east of the proposed pool, but if they're putting the slime there and it's gonna decant, it's just going right back into the hole where it came from.
Right.
So, I would say that if they were to just take fabric, lay it out in a square, take some hay bales around the perimeter, a little crushed stone emergency overflow, and run the pump into that, or basically, no, sorry, not the pump, put the spoils from the pool's excavation just into this little teacup area, and they can decant right there, and at least then it's filtered.
Yep.
And I can provide you the detail, it's just right out of the stormwater manual.
Yep.
that'd be great.
And maybe that would be, add that as a special condition, should the commission grant this as number 9,
Yep.
that an area for dewatering saturated soil be provided in the front yard, designed to the 2000 and, I believe it's 4 stormwater, CT deep stormwater manual.
Sounds like a great idea. I'll give Nicole's email to send those details to.
Any other questions?
No, I'm good.
I'd entertain a motion.
Okay, I'll do it. I make a motion that this is a regulated activity because it's within the 100 feet of the upland review area.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
I'll make another motion that's not a significant activity, because it's outside of the wetlands area. I probably didn't do that right. What?
Second?
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
And I make a third motion that we grant the permit subject to the special conditions outlined and the additional one for the, for dealing with the saturated soil.
Just maybe specific to dewatering of the saturated soil in the front yard of the residence.
Okay, so, yes.
Pursuant to CT Deep 2004 Stormwater Manual.
Yes, I agree with that.
All right, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to new business, receipt of new applications.
We have one new application for next month. That is from, I'm going to confuse this, Vincent Bickford. It is for improvements to existing blast bunkers, which are to the east of the railroad, off of the Hot Meadow Street, that's 660 Hot Meadow Street. There's two bunkers right now have been determined by a federal inspection to not conform to their safety standards, and they have to raise them. So they will be working in mapped wetland soils according to, and the surveyor copied our map. The area's right here where the bunkers are located. They're also working in the floodplain and have provided certifications that will require approval from the zoning commission for work within a floodplain. So that's for next meeting. You also will be receiving an application for a map amendment from EB, Ensign Bickford, for all of their properties associated with the remedial plans that have been filed with the state of Connecticut. A copy of the plans has been filed with our town clerk's office. I could scan those documents over to you so you're aware of it and know that this is coming. One of the areas adjacent to this requires 21,000 square feet of disturbance, so roughly half an acre of disturbance, of which it right now is mapped as wetlands. Michael, I've spoken with, there's two soil scientists who are betting on the job. Michael Klein indicated that he felt that the area may not be wetland soils, but he's not done any field work. They're probably going to start the field work the first week of December once the contract's awarded. That probably is coming in January. Well, and it's because, assuming it's a map amendment, they will be required to go through a public hearing process for that. We only meet once in January, so just in case for some reason, since we only meet once in we meet twice in January. I apologize, we meet the day after New Year's, January 2nd. Zoning Commission meets once in January. Those are two projects that will be coming on similar to this, and you'll have all the details regarding the blast bunker application in your next packet.
All right, moving on to general commission business, approval of minutes for October 17th. Does anyone have any additions or changes they'd like to make to the minutes?
I would comment, Chairman, that we did talk at some length about the fact that what we were able to approve for the church was constrained by our jurisdiction, and that a more desirable and elegant solution could have been achieved had the church been motivated to involve its neighbor, the school, to deal with it on a larger scale. We were not able to require that, but we did want to mention it, and it somehow escaped mention in the minutes.
Point. How do we go about adding that to the minutes?
You just amend
Amend the minutes to reflect that we did have that discussion.
It was at least a 20-minute conversation.
Yes, it was.
Well, it was not a quick two
No.
minutes. Don is correct on that.
No, it was a good discussion. So hopefully that will be noted and filed with the minutes as amended. Thank you for catching that, Don. All right, so on to the forest management discussion and workshop. So, do we have any comments from the audience? Anyone would like to say anything tonight before we? Yes, Susan.
Should I come up? Should I just?
Wherever.
Okay, well, I have a couple of papers. So first, I wanted to thank you for having the meeting tonight. I know a lot of people are out of town, and maybe the other half of the town is at the meeting at the library on the budget. The couple of brief points that I wanted to make tonight is related to the budget. The good news is that this old growth forest designation won't cost anything. And I worry that we may have perhaps overly complicated this issue with too much information, but in general, there's been a group of very dedicated citizens, and many of them with professional credentials, that have been researching and networking on these issues for close to 15 years now. And we've sent information to Open Space, and I know now kind of all of this is at the Conservation Commission. And our goal is really the best possible outcome for the town, both environmentally and financially. And we're blessed to have a lot of open space in this town, both town-owned and state-owned and land trust. So we have a variety of opportunities, and there's really no single best approach for managing land. There's no one approach that applies to everything. So a couple of things that I wanted to mention tonight is that since the last meeting, Robert Leverett, he's the National Tree, what is he called? National, American Forest National Cadre. He did come to Simsbury. I had received that correspondence from him previously, but I had never met him before. And he particularly came because he was interested in looking at our forests and also in remeasuring the Pinchot sycamore. So in terms of our forests, he was able to take a short walk in Belden. He needs a knee replacement, so he's not really massively hiking now. But the comments that he had about Belden was that it was better than he was expecting, especially since it's right in town. He estimated that there are some trees that are about 150 years old. There's a good structure to the forest and some very large old trees. He was actually particularly impressed that there are such large beech trees still there. Most beech trees in this era and that environment are not in that good of shape right now. And he also did note that if we did do more active management, it would likely increase the invasives in the interior of the forest, which is very relatively free right now, or totally free of invasives, and increase deer. So I don't know if that's something that we want. Probably the most exciting part of this trip was the remeasurement of the sycamore. So they had been, after it had lost that large limb, and they weren't sure how the tree was going to fare. But he measured it, he was very excited. He wrote a whole report, and he's submitting the sycamore for consideration as a national champion tree, which would be a huge, big deal. And he wants to write an article in American Forest about the sycamore. So I just have one copy, but I can send an electronic version. This is his kind of official report of the sycamore, and I also provided this to the Board of Selectmen meeting. So that's one thing. And then I know people had asked about, what does an old growth forest look like? So he said he could send me a bunch of photos, but he didn't do that. He sent me a report of a recent hike that he went on in the Adirondacks, and it kind of describes the forest and gives a lot of pictures. There's a lot of engineering and measurement and calculus and things like that. But if you're interested in that, this is the kind of work that he does and reports that he writes about forests, and there's photos in here that might be of interest. And I can also send that electronically also. So he did not have a chance to go to the Ethel Walker Woods, but I did want to report that the school is very much in favor of the designation. So those are the only things that I wanted to add tonight. I don't know if you have any questions for me. I might need to leave before your deliberations because it's Boy Scout wreath night and a school night, so I have other things.
I have a question, but go ahead. If you're
Yeah, I was going to ask how he got into the Belden Forest.
We walked,
With the bad name.
it's right next to Boy Scout Hall.
Yeah.
So we walked up that little hill there. That could use some improvement in terms of visibility and kind of the egress. Is that only an exit or entrance into the forest, I guess? Yeah.
Okay.
You mean with his knee or?
Yeah, even with a bad knee, he was able to
Well,
get
he
that
had,
hill.
he has his walking poles
Yeah.
and stuff like that, so,
Okay.
yeah.
So in your statement, you used the term active management. And you were afraid that if we did active management, it would increase things like deer. And so I'm wondering if in that term there are some implicit things you mean by active management. So I was wondering if you could break them up, and you've kind of have this big category, active management. If you could define for me what you think that means right now, in terms of what you're applying when you say that.
Right. Well, I guess in my mind, I would say active management would be the same thing as what might also be called sustainable forestry, which is you would bring in equipment, remove trees. You're removing trees in order to let the younger trees grow more quickly.
Okay.
So then you would go back in and remove those trees. So it's kind of a successive
Right,
process.
so it isn't so much, and the reason I'm zeroing in this is because I want to make sure we're kind of clear on our terms, because I think sometimes they mean different things to other people. So what you're really concerned about here is sort of, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, I want to make sure I'm being clear on this. It's sort of the practice of manipulating the forest with heavy machinery on a regular basis, or just taking trees in general. I mean, I would, if you had to take a tree, if you had to basically take a tree because it was a safety hazard or anything with, hand equipment, would that fall under that same thing as active management in your case?
I would consider keeping the forest safe for recreation, and it doesn't necessarily have to be free of invasives.
Right,
Some
right.
invasives can kind of coexist
Sure.
and not become out of control.
Right.
There's certain invasives that I hate that could be a separate
Sure.
discussion. So I would say it means kind of trying to keep the forest as an intact ecosystem that's also safe for recreation and,
Okay.
not burdened by adverse predators, invasives, public health hazards, any kind of
But-
adverse condition.
Okay, so that makes sense, but when you said the word active management, you're really mostly thinking about some kind of prescribed machinery harvesting of trees in a planned way.
Right,
Okay.
chronic manipulation of the ecosystem, which may
Okay.
not be necessary for it as an ecosystem.
Okay, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so, that sounds good.
While we're talking about Belden too, I did have a chance to get into Belden recently, and it took me a couple of tries to find the best way
Took me
in.
30 years.
And I was gonna say, I think if we do nothing else, I think we should come up with a recommendation that we
I totally
put in a
Yes.
proper sign.
I totally
That's a
agree.
map.
Yeah.
Something
Trails
at
could
the
use a little
entrance.
work too, the trail could use, it's not well marked.
No.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
But that was, those things were, those kinds of things were all in the Belden plan,
Yeah.
Right.
to upgrade the education, the trail markers a
Yeah.
little bit.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't consider that to be part of, it might be an active I wouldn't consider that to be what you're describing as active management.
Correct. I
Okay.
totally support those things,
Okay.
particularly if you want to advertise this as an old growth forest in the town. It's right next to Boy Scout Hall and the church.
Yep.
Tourism is very interested in this, so we should definitely showcase it.
Right.
Well, the other thing is that when I was in there, it looked to me like there had been a lot of intentional manipulation of trees and small trees to create habitat
Yeah.
inside Belden.
At times, they
There was
talked
some
about it.
logging,
Yeah.
maybe 30 years ago or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like it wasn't in the last, couple of years.
And then the DEP has a bear site in there, so I don't
Right.
know if the DEP has done anything related to their bear tracking
Yeah.
site.
But there were some, kind of neatly piled, brush.
Actually, that
was
might
in
be
there.
the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts go in there sometimes,
Okay.
because they meet right at the
Uh-huh.
church, and they run around in there, so I'm not sure if they may be piling things or.
Okay.
We could check with them, but that might be the mini foresters doing things.
They have had some projects working on the trails.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
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 okay.
so it might
Okay.
be, chopping up something that fell over the trail.
yeah. And sometimes they have little campfires on the edge of the church parking lot and stuff. They might be going up there and grabbing stuff for that.
Yeah. Okay.
I was in to do a walk with the Simsbury Land Trust, and I took my tape measure, and one of the trees I did measure was about 10, just inches shy of 10 feet circumference, which was
Mhm.
really quite,
Yeah.
it was about, over 3 feet diameter.
I think he measured the sycamore as over 28 feet in circumference. It's just massive.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
So we don't have that many trees like that. I was very impressed the first time. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
First time I went, and it took me a long time, because I thought Belden Forest Trail was that miserable little thing
Mhm.
behind the library, and I thought,
No.
what's this? But once you got in there, I was very impressed with that little
Yeah.
pocket wood. I mean, and it does get, it's, for being in the center of town, I thought, it's a interesting place. Have you been able to go in?
Not yet, I'm gonna
All
try.
right. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I actually got in from the other
The other
end. On, I forget the name of the street, not Beldenwood Street,
Yeah.
right. Right, there's a sign and it's just a little more obvious from that end.
But it was, again, looking at it again, there are very few invasives in that woods.
So that was an interesting comment as I went through all the different plans for the different forests. What you sort of hear the differences between them was, what were they suggesting for control of invasives, how many were there? Which I think then goes back to somewhat of our definition of what do we think active management is. We've had people that say, the forestry plans are to somehow have some control of invasives. All three of those plans, I think, have talked about that a little bit. We've had people say that we don't need a control for them, but I think that's one of the things we have to sort of decide upon is what do we mean when we say management of any of these kinds, right? We know that management ranges from no management to full old-fashioned forestry management and someplace in between. So I don't think it's just that we only think there's one management. We have to talk about the individual tactics we want to get to each of these goals.
Did anyone else want to? Yes.
Hi, I'm Katie Gall, and I'm a junior at Simsbury High School, and I'm here on behalf of the Earth's Advocates Club there. And we are very interested in the environment in Simsbury, especially the forests. Several of us, myself included, attended the Forest Forum last April, and we support having old-growth forests in Simsbury. Belden Forest is, I think especially important to me and probably many of my classmates because it's walking distance from the high school and downtown where most of my friends work and hang out there. And the Ethel Walker Woods is accessible to many neighborhoods and kids and families. So we just want to tell you guys that we support the designation. We're excited for these forests and believe that it will help more people get out and visit and learn about them.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming tonight.
So I have a question for you.
Oh.
In your thinking about old growth forest, my understanding is that sort of to be a defined old growth forest in a bunch of different ways, there needs to be a certain amount of acreage for the wildlife to be, even it could be a very old set of trees, it's not really an old growth forest if you don't have the right wildlife mix in there or not enough space for that. Do you have, in any of your research that you've done on that, can you describe that better? These are things I've heard about in passing, but I don't think I've ever gotten a good definition of that.
To my understanding, the designation that we're trying to get passed isn't it's more of a saving of that forest to allow it to develop into an old growth forest, leave it alone and allow it to blossom, I guess. I don't think it necessarily has to at this time meet all the qualifications, but I could be wrong.
No, I don't think it has to meet it. I was just wondering if there was a minimum size to achieve that goal, but you're thinking about it primarily from the tree perspective as opposed to the wildlife or some other pieces, and that's fine. It was really an academic question.
I actually did ask, just coincidentally, I did write to Bob Leverett and ask him about that recently.
Okay.
And he said it could be actually as small as between 5 and 20 acres, depending on the characteristics. So,
Okay.
It depends on what creatures you're talking about.
Sure.
So I don't think there's any if it's gonna be a core forest, that's different because that requires a large distance from any kind of intrusion for
Okay.
species that need to walk, like birds that hatch and walk on the forest floor. And I think that's, I think it has to be like 30 meters from any edge or 300 meters from any edge. I don't know, Sue Breckwitz might know.
It's 300 to 900 meters.
300,
Okay.
900 meters from any edge, so that basically defines a big block that can't be crisscrossed by trails.
My guess is that's what I was thinking about. I was thinking
Yeah.
about the difference between a core forest and an old growth. So thank you, that helps a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, from the age of some of these trees, we're already sort of almost there, and seeing some of the definitions for old growth is 120 years. I mean, it depends what part of the country you're in. Yeah.
Right,
So-
I guess, and I think we just sort of cleared this up, but part of it was, if we're thinking about a bigger plan for
Yeah.
all of Simsbury, and if the definition of something that was going to have to be old growth was something that was going to be big enough to be a core
Yeah,
forest,
yeah.
then maybe, we should be focusing someplace else, but it sounds like that's a distinction between these
Yeah.
two, so that's fine, that's cleared something up for me.
And I know that Mike Payne's here tonight. The Board of Selectmen is interested in the old growth. Would you like to speak to that?
Just share a couple thoughts. Mike Payne, Board of Selectmen. This, I'm not sure it necessarily started at the Open Space Committee. It's been conversation in a bunch of different places. I think ultimately, my concern from the Board of Selectmen's perspective is that I'm not sure we're going to come up with a plan that will fit all of the properties throughout the town. And my concern would be to try to shoehorn in one particular plan to all of the properties. Probably would not be a good thing for the town. But I think looking at everything, and maybe we have a couple different plans for different, I'm going to say different properties. Frankly, much like the Land Trust has done, it hasn't been just, this is it. Because I think our diversity is a good thing in a bunch of different ways. And, I would, don't take this personally, challenge you guys to look at it from a couple different perspectives. I think part of the good news, bad news about the Belton Forest is it's tough to get in there. That kind of keeps it more secluded. If you pave the road so everybody can get in there, you end up with different kinds of problems. But I think that having the abilities, much like they're doing it at Town Forest now, to make it more easier for people to get into the Walker property, that is a good thing. Do we necessarily want paved paths through the whole place? Personally, no. I don't see that as a good idea. But the flip side is, you do want someone to be able to take their wheelchair and go in there. And so we want to be inclusive. And I would just ask you to think about those different perspectives as you guys literally travel down this path.
And as we were discussing before the meeting, I think the plan here is to come up with the goal, what we want for the forest. Now, it might be different for the different parcels. The goal might be different for different parcels, but to have, and then strategies for how to achieve those goals. But I know you've had discussions about the old growth, possibly designating a portion of a property or one particular parcel for old growth. Is that something that the Board of Selectmen is, I would imagine there's some wonderful benefits for the town if we have.
Potentially there are, and we literally, Susan came in not even a month ago, I think, and talked to us about that, and we haven't acted on it, to be very honest.
No, I think you're waiting for a recommendation from us.
We're looking for some feedback from
Yeah.
you before we head down that path.
But there are some potential benefits to the town for having an old growth. I don't think there are that many there aren't any others in Connecticut, or there aren't very many,
My understanding is there are none.
so it would.
There's none officially designated. There might be some little bits here and there, but they're not you know, nobody really, there was an area in, I think Cornwall or someplace that got blown down.
Oh, Cathedral Pines or whatever they,
Some pine thing got blown down, I don't know.
Cathedral Pines.
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's less than, I know in Massachusetts, it's less than 0.1% of the forested area. So it's really our most rare habitat type.
And speaking to Eric Hammerling, he thought it'd be rather intriguing for Simsbury to be a leader in this, to set the stage for others, to set aside properties towards this old growth designation.
Well, the fact that
And the
we've
only
got-
way you can do it is
Yeah.
by starting now.
You gotta start somewhere, and,
Yeah.
and, I mean, we already have a third of the town that is either in open space in some fashion or conservation easements, which is amazing.
It is, it
So,
is.
I think we have the ability to look at that and possibly do different plans, and I think a lot of this will also be education, as we, this commission constantly hears from different groups that managing a forest means you have to typically do something in the forest, and it's not to raise money in every case. It really is more to offset some of your costs, but it's finding a balance too.
And it's also, but it also means, to do it for a purpose, and you have to identify what the purpose is, and whether or not the action is actually as beneficial as one would hope, or whether we're finding out that perhaps there's another way of achieving the same goal by a different strategy.
That's
So
part
these
of
are
the real
things,
education.
yeah, for us as well, as the public.
I didn't say who was getting educated.
No, everybody, I think everybody, and what we're finding is that, I think a lot of what we've discussed is that this is not something that has to be acted on immediately. I mean, some of these things do not have, the forests work on a much different time frame than we do, although we're sort of working on the forest time frame to get this done.
Maybe not take quite as long as the forest does.
Maybe, but perhaps there's some other steps we can do in the meantime as we work towards that goal.
Mark, you talk about dealing with several properties in different ways. One that's of particular interest to me is the land off Stafford Road. The town owns more than 50 acres of forest off Stafford Road, which abuts the pretty much never traveled upon portion of Talcott Mountain State Park. Some of it's...
Well, it was quiet till you blabbed on it.
We're not on tape, are we?
No, we are.
Seriously, you have 50 acres that is not, as far as I know, molested hardly at all, and is protected by all that state forest. I think that's a particularly interesting thing that we ought to be looking at.
We have so many special parcels in this town that it's amazing, to me. And we're really fortunate. And part of that being fortunate is a lot of people don't know about all those parcels until, well, no, I'm kidding. But we're really fortunate, and I think the collective, we need to do all we can to both protect them, but also manage them in a thoughtful way. So, that's the end of my editorial comments.
Yeah, and to figure out what we mean by managing.
Well, and I think defining that, and it may be different, coming up with definitions that then can be applied, because just in talking to people, it's been very interesting, different people's perception of what that is. And so, that's all part of the conversation.
Thank you, Mike.
Great, thank you very much.
Yes.
Well, I'm Dave Chase. Oh, I'm gonna turn my ears down. Sorry. I have them up because it's very hard to hear in this room. But I'm Dave Chase from 39 Woodhaven, and we live sort of right next to Ethel Walker Woods. But in our backyard, it's sort of the headwaters of Stratton Brook. It starts up the top of the hill and comes down and works down through a wooded section in our backyard and everybody's backyard around there, and it's really neat. And it's untouched, basically, because nobody wants to get back there and do anything. We had 2 monster pine trees come down. One of them came down and hit the next one over, and they're just lying there, these gigantic things. And then at another time, there was another big pine tree about like that. It came out, and came down right in the middle of the stream. And sort of, I love that wood, you know. I just think that's the neatest place. And of course, animals wander through. But I think there's something about it. You have old trees and animals drilling holes and living in it. Nobody's touched those. You have moss growing around. You have different kinds of plants. When a tree comes down, certain things happen. And some areas are really well, little trees, little bushes and stuff like that. Other places are grown up. And that's the kind of thing that I really like to see. I've spent a lot of time in the woods in Maine as a teenager, and just to see a woods that is let go and does its own thing is a very special kind of place. So we've talked about old growth forests and stuff. I mean, you got Ethel Walker Woods, and it isn't really anything like a core forest because you got trails running through. But if you wanted to take a cross-country wheelchair in there of some sort, maybe even a powered wheelchair with tracks, you know, you could do it. Trails are wide. I mean, I assume you've all seen it, right? And the Belden Woods, my wife and I went in there the other day, and that's just a wonderful beginning of a place to leave alone, as far as I'm concerned. I watched the logging that went on in Ethel Walker Forest, I don't know how many years ago, but they had been doing it about every 10 years. And there's a machine almost the size of this room, which is a dragger, you know, great big treads and big wheels and big lugs on the wheels. I mean, it's a monster. And that's what it takes to get trees in and out. I remember the funny part was when we were talking about the Ethel Walker Woods and going to buy it, and what is it really there, and what about this vernal pool? And whoever was, I don't know, it wasn't a forester, but it was somebody who was dealing with the land in a professional manner. He said, that's not a vernal pool. That's a hole dug by the, you know, by the logger. Well, today it's a vernal pool. And I think, you know, when you get loggers in a place that's special, you end up with problems. If you're going to take something like Onion Mountain or something, you know, if you want to log that, fine, you know. If you want to get in there and do something and make different kinds of environment for different kinds of animal, great. But it seems to me there ought to be one or two places in town, and your 50-acre piece included, where we leave things alone and let the woods do what it does. And you can go in there and you can have tree climbers if you have branches that are widow makers, if you have trees that are about ready to come down, they're going to be problems. You know, you can deal with those one at a time. You don't need a logging machine to go in there and do that. But I just know if you go to that little piece of woods in Massachusetts that's never been touched because it was too hard for loggers to get to, it just does something in here, you know? It really does. You see trees like that, you can't get 5 people around. Belden Forest is halfway there already. I wouldn't touch it. Number one, you couldn't even get big machines in there. There's something about Ethel Walker Woods. It's got a whole section which is sort of boggy and marshy, and nobody ever goes there. And then you can get right up to the next to that in one of the trails. And then you walk through in the big wide open spaces, and I don't know what it is. I can't describe it. But there's something wonderful about that place. And when you see the logging operation in there, it just feels like something's being torn apart, and it shouldn't be. So I'm not saying we ought to make everything one way. There are good reasons to take some trees out and make open spaces, and you have different kind of animals, different kind of bushes and trees grow up. You need that kind of thing if you want to have a variety. But I think we ought to have 1, 2, 3 places which are really let go. And then you get to see what happens. It's something very special. That's about all I can say. I mean, this is, a very amateur approach to it, but I know a lot of people walk through Ethel Walker Woods. I don't know who walks through Belden. I haven't checked up on that. A lot of people, I meet all kinds of people in there. And maybe there's 20 people, 25, 50 people, I don't know. But we love it. We really do.
Thank you.
I believe it.
So I have a question. In your idea of sort of leaving the forest alone, would you ever think about controlling for invasive species in there? Would that be?
Well, I'd love to get in Ethel Walker and take out invasive species. There's a bunch of barberry that's grown in there where they did the logging, and they opened up stuff that's too wide.
Okay.
I think one tree comes down, you don't get that kind of thing.
Okay.
But you take out a swath, and then you have a real open spot, and all kinds of things happen.
Okay, so from your perspective, setting aside some forest not to do anything in would not preclude some amount of low impact maintenance for things? Okay.
No, you gotta do that. I mean, people are gonna be using it, you can't just,
Well,
just can't let it.
I think that's definitely a position. I think we've heard some people describe that perhaps not doing anything is equally viable. And I was just wondering from your perspective,
Yeah.
which way you were thinking about it.
Well, anything, I'm thinking, logging, anything.
Yeah, I think the question, if it's not heavy machinery, what do we, what would we consider to be low impact maintenance?
Very low,
Okay, sounds reasonable.
sure. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else to? All right. Thank you very much for your input. So I know you and I have worked on some aspect, and did everyone got to see it? No? Didn't it go out?
No.
Because there's something wrong with my email when I send it to you. Because I remember sending it to you, I sent it to you.
Yeah, I looked it over your comments, and I wasn't sure what the next step was, so I
No, I
didn't.
was neither, so. right.
So I think some of the comments you had back to me were sort of indicative of the same issue. What's the difference between the goals and tactics? Because you were definitely talking about some of the tactics go with the goals, and I make that distinction. You settle on goals,
Yeah.
and then you worry about how you do it. And I think, this is a good example. One of the goals is to split the property, split all the different properties into some things that might be designated old growth, other things that might be designated, something else. But then how are you going to achieve them is specific to those pieces. But having said all that, I think we're at the point where we can take, some of those ideas we've heard a lot, and we need to basically start to make the next steps towards consolidating around the different forest plans and what we're going to do about them.
I think the first thing is the goals. Because once we have the goals, then we can discuss the strategies. I would like to see one of the goals, to identify those areas that could be designated. We could do this easily, the old growth designations. The fact that Belden doesn't have really easy access for anything, I could see if we did one step, even if we took it out of context with all the rest. Get that one off our plate, but I don't know if anyone else is ready for that.
Yeah, well, I think I'd rather take the approach that we come up with our own goals and our own sets of strategies, and if those end up fitting with the old growth network
All right.
goals and requirements, then that's great. Then they get that designation,
All right.
and that can work out really well. But I don't think that we should try to tailor our management goals around their objectives.
I agree
The
with
goal-
that, but
the goal-
I go a step further, because I must say, I don't think that adding the Old Growth Networks brand to our forest does much for us. Just, affiliating with the affiliating Belden Woods, for example, with the Old Growth Network, doesn't provide the woods with any incremental protection. To have incremental protection, you need the easement, which Susan, as the Hartford County Coordinator for the network, told us could be the next step. And I must say, I don't see why we would find such an easement to be acceptable. I mean, the folks in town are already dismayed that one kind of land use decision has been forcibly outsourced to the siting council. And here we would be voluntarily outsourcing partial control of the management of the property to a third party. And the Old Growth Network itself does not accept easements. It would have to be yet another party.
All right.
And easements are in perpetuity. You don't know what the complexion of that third party is going to be in 50 or 100 years.
Okay.
Our job as a commission, as dictated in the statute that creates conservation commissions, is to advise the Board of Selectmen and other boards on how to manage properties. It seems to me an abdication of our responsibility to not step up and say, all right, here's what we think is needed for this property, and we should do it. I'm delighted to go to the Board of Selectmen and say, we think this needs to be done for this property, and we need resources to do it, and let's all get behind this and do it this way. I don't think involving a third party from outside does anything, and I'm not convinced that the tourism benefit is particularly real.
All right, here's another way. I hear what you're saying. I don't think the discussion was about an easement. I mean, no. I mean, I think that was in the last meeting that we found out that the old growth is not. There is no easement for the old growth designation.
It was to be the second phase.
But it doesn't have to be. I mean, that's still in our prerogative to say we didn't, and there was no interest in our discussion that we would go that route. I think the sole, if I could advocate for the old growth, is to say this piece of property at this point, we would like to keep intact and let it, as Mr. Chase said, let it do what it's going to do with minor adjustment of, if a tree comes down over a trail, we'll take it out. Or if there's an invasive plant thing, we'll take that out. That's not abrogating our responsibility. It's just saying, this particular piece of property, we would like to see what's going to happen to it over time without excessive management. We want to see what happens to it. And just by saying, this has properties that are old growth, is on its way to old growth. The thing that we would like to see with this piece of property is that it continue on its path, as far as we can see, to be old growth. And I think that's all that's saying. It's not saying we're locking it in, but we're just identifying that there's something special about this piece of property, and we want to see it, if it can't go. I mean, a hurricane could come through and wipe the whole thing out, and that would change that would no longer be necessarily an old growth property anymore.
But the
Just like
network
Cathedral Park.
affiliation brings with it a lot of baggage, it seems to me.
Like what kind of baggage?
Like the notion that there cannot be active management.
Well-
One might conclude years hence that active management is needed.
Well, again, I think we're getting into that semantics, what is meant by active management. I think the designation, this is old growth and we'd like to see what happened to it in this one particular place. We've still got lots of other places that, we can discuss goals and strategies for.
I think this is again a discussion between goals and tactics. Because I think, Don, on your end, you're very concerned, I think rightly so, that if we were to go down and to join the old growth forest network as a tactic to promote, the goal of designating forests within Simsbury as having old growth characteristics, that's not a good tactic to achieve that.
but the goal of.
Goal is to say, that we'd like this one to be old growth.
Right, but if we could probably agree that we would like to have these stands, some of these stands to have old growth characteristics.
Yes.
Whether the tactic of joining the old growth network is the right tactic to achieve that is a different debate.
I would say as well regarding Belden, that Belden is, I probably spend more time in Belden than everybody else in this room put together. I'm there a lot. And I love Belden, it's fine. But if you read the draft management plan, one of the things you find is that the much-loved beaches are sick.
Yes.
And they're not going to be there long-term. The hemlocks are sick, and they're not going to be there long-term. You've got both the adelgid and the scale, and you've got the bark disease in the beaches. There's a lot of stuff that is going to need to be dealt with in this property. Now, you can say, just let them fall down, as long as they don't fall down on the trail, we're okay. But it's a town park, and people who walk there, I don't think are going to be amused by the fascinating characteristics of the ecosystem of all these dead things lying about. There are other properties that are better suited to that than Belden. Belden is a centrally located town park that, if we manage it well, it can be a wonderful woodland thing. The draft management plan notes the presence of the big pines in Stand 2. It talks about creating that as a reserve. There's a lot of language in the draft management plan that intends to do the kind of preservation of these distinguished old trees that you'd like to have. But I think realistically, we have to acknowledge that this property needs more as a town park than we could provide it if we adhere in a very slavish way to an ideology of old growth.
Since, one of the things I think we have a problem with is terminology. When you say a park, I have quite a different idea of park as a forest with trails through it. I don't see Belden as a park. I mean, I'd take objection to park. And as far as the beech trees, I mean, there is always a succession through a forest of their species, and our trees are especially challenged at the moment. We've got a lot of diseases in our trees. I don't think we have the resources to go in and prune out every tree that's sick. I just don't think we have the money for that. And I did notice there were an awful lot of young seedlings coming up. The Bob Leverett, when he went through, he said it was surprising how healthy the trees were, considering. And one of the things I think we're finding now is that the trees do share resources, even interspecies. And it could be that the trees are not as sick as they could be because they're being helped out by some of the other trees, especially the older trees have more connections to than the younger trees.
May I say that I know Mr. Leverett. I've walked in the woods with Mr. Leverett. He's a wonderful man. He's an admirable man.
Mm-hmm.
He's done very valuable work in identifying and popularizing big trees. He's not, as his resume indicates, a forest ecologist.
All right.
His resume is that he is an evangelist of old growth.
Is this, I'm sorry, this is the expert for the Old Growth Network, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I would agree. I have not met him, but I didn't find his comments to be all that helpful, and I didn't find him to be really credible.
So what type of management would we, I mean, it's a strategy. What do we want to do in Belden?
Well, I think with
What is the goal
with respect to the Old Growth Network, I think that we should really table any discussion of involvement with that group until
All right.
after we decide on our own management plans.
But could it be that we would decide that certain things like Belden Forest could be left alone with just minimal, safety
Well,
management?
that's I think that's a separate discussion,
But that's
right?
what I'm saying is a goal, to leave certain portions of our forest to have less management than others.
certainly.
Well, yeah, but that's, I mean, again, that's just a different
No, that's a goal,
discussion than the
but that is.
old growth network.
That's fine, that's fine. You know, we don't have to go the old growth net, but still, the goal would be, I would think, for certain portions of our woods, to leave them so that they can get old growth characteristics. Old growth characteristics is the goal, the old growth network is a tactic, but the old growth characteristics is the goal.
I mean,
Can we get that far?
I mean, I think the old growth network, I don't know, whatever you
Well,
want to call it.
forget about the
is-
old growth network.
I think
I'm
we
talking about
should just-
old growth, that's what I just said.
So let's
Forget the old growth.
define old growth characteristics a bit. We're talking about trees of different age classifications, trees of different sizes, trees of different species.
And with age, something other than, some of our forests are like 70 years and under. I'm talking about trees that have some age to them, as they do in Belton, to leave that to see, to see if it can't develop old growth characteristics with time. I mean, that would be a goal. Some forests, maybe we decide, chop them all down, have thickets for wildlife management, for different habitat. But some of our, as a goal for some of our forests, to leave them to be minimally managed. Safety, that's a different thing, invasive plants, identify certain things that we would do in those forests. But to see if they can't go towards old growth characteristics as a goal for the forest.
That, I do not disagree that could be done in some parcels. I would hasten to say, that I don't think anybody's talking about chopping down the forest anymore.
but-
And the town has not advocated clear cuts for cottontail rabbits or any of the other reasons people are having clear cuts. The town has not advocated that at all.
I'm not saying they have, but it's our prerogative to say, we need more thicket habitat. This might be an area, there might be certain areas that would work. I know that's happened in other towns. However, what I'm saying is, for the goals, getting towards the goals, do we want to have some forests that are left with minimal management to see if they can't establish old growth characteristics? Or do we want to have some that are managed more because they're going to be more intensively used? To identify what the goals are. I mean, the management is a technique. What are the goals for our forest?
Well, one thing that I would like to see is, whatever we decide on as our goals, I think it's helpful to have, as much as we can, to have some metrics around those goals. And one of the things that I really liked about these draft management plans that we have was the inventory of the trees and the species and the sizes of the trees and the animals that were present. I found that to be very, very helpful as a starting point. And so, I think that the management, whatever we, recommend or decide on as a management strategy, I think we need to recognize that the management strategy needs to adapt to, the forest as the forests change, right?
Absolutely.
And so, I think it would be really helpful to have a regular inventory or a regular evaluation of the forests. Maybe something like every, 10 years to redo,
Do we have?
the inventory.
Well, 10 years, that might be, I
I
mean,
just threw that
I
out.
just-
I don't know.
yeah.
I wouldn't get into the details of it, but the idea that having metrics and a status of the
Right.
forest health.
that's a good.
Because I think it's one thing to say, we don't want to touch the forest, we're going to step back, and we expect that to, help the forest grow. I think we need to, be willing to reevaluate that every,
Yes.
every so often.
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Or even, if we propose a more active management strategy to, to reevaluate that as well.
well, the management strategy goes towards the goals. First, we have to establish what are the goals for the forest?
Yeah, I know, I know this is,
Yeah.
I'm just brainstorming.
Yeah, no,
I'm
I
off
know.
topic.
I mean,
But
this
I
is-
thought it would be
But
helpful.
no, but it's good that I think the definition of any plan should have a way of evaluating how you're doing on,
Yeah.
on like metrics and things. And actually, one of the things that came up at the workshop was the use of drones now for forestry management, when you do both counting of trees, laying out of trees, health of trees, water, so the soil. So the ability to actually go through and get a snapshot of our forests right now, their health, and then compare that 10 years from now is relatively easy. Now's the technology didn't exist 10 years ago.
So is a forest inventory and database a goal?
Well, I'm not sure that that's a goal. I would think I would think that in any of our plans, part of our tactics should be to be able to measure, and reevaluate how we're doing on those things. Because it may not be that the goal's problem, but it may just be the tactics are a problem.
But don't we sort of have this, Charlie? If you look at the Onion Mountain plan, for example, I think it's a 10-year horizon.
Yeah.
And it's got, it's inventoried the forest into 9 or 10 stands, as I recall, and it proposed some actions in each year for several of the stands.
Absolutely.
And at the end, it says, go back to number 1. So there is like a 10-year sort of cycle for evaluating the progress. And for example, at Onion Mountain, for example, you can see at Onion Mountain where, as a result of the last cutting, there is some succession which would not otherwise, we think, have occurred.
Yeah.
And that's been looked at and assessed and measured, and it's quite clear that if we don't take the next step, that will be reversed. The canopy closes up, you'll lose that succession. Mother Nature might deliver it back to us in maybe 100 years or maybe not. But there is this, the process that exists with the town's forester, as exemplified by Onion Mountain, I think includes this very sort of inventorying and assessing process on a continuing basis.
All right, but let's get back, I mean, Charlie, you've been hammering, saying we've got to come up with our goals first, and then we have the tactics. Seeking age diversity or different succession is a goal. How you achieve it is a different thing. But what I want to get down on paper, maybe just tonight, what are some of the goals for, I mean, yes, this inventoried what you can do over 10 years, but that's a strategy for the goal, and the goal should be, I would imagine their goal is succession and age diversity. Is that the goal?
If you actually go and you look at it.
No, there's a list of goals.
I know, but some of the goals are so, like wildlife management, but it doesn't say which wildlife. It says reptiles, birds, it doesn't say how you manage that forest is highly dependent on which species you're talking about.
Yep. But
you can't just say birds.
Well, I mean, there is the reality that we will not have, the town will not have, or will not devote the resources to this process for a high level of specificity and a micromanaging of any.
No, I'm not talking about micromanaging. I'm saying if you're managing it for pileated woodpeckers, you want to leave as many dead trees up there as possible. If you're managing it for, ground feeders, I mean, you're going to do it in a different way. If you're managing it for thicket birds, you're going to do it at least identify what kind of birds we're going to do it for. I mean, what is that? And that's what I'm talking about, the goal. Is the goal to manage for forest birds? Is it for manage for thicket birds? Is it for meadow birds? What is the goal when it says, I've read those plans and I can't find what, they say that the only animal they mention were deer. And I can't figure out whether they're managing to increase the deer or to reduce the deer.
So if you go back to all of the management plans, the one thing I was kind of struck by when I read them all sort of again together was, in general they had sort of the similar format. And if you actually looked at the goals, I'm looking at the goals for Bellin Forest right now, and outside of like the generally the bottom one, which is generate income from the sale of forest products to help fund land management projects on the property. Outside of that one, and the fact that some of them don't have the detail that maybe you're talking about in terms of, it says protect and enhance diverse wildlife habitat, maintain and improve forest ecosystem health. They all have these general goals. almost all of which I think we could sign up for.
We can, but I think they have to be a little bit more specific than that. They're too, like, we want mom and apple pie and, you know, and, you know, the American way, but they don't really tell you what they want.
Well, and I would say that if I looked at these things, they almost look like they were, like the template was taken and stuck in each one of these things.
Yes, it
And then
was.
they added them on. But if you were to actually state that we sort of talked about what the philosophy of some of our general management is, these things apply to every spot, but then the goals would be specific to the individual forest.
Yes.
The more details.
Yes.
And
Do we want to manage this particular
place.
spot for what?
right, and I
What
would.
is the goal for that particular
And it should,
property?
and I think from the beginning, we said that we wanted to make sure that when we go to look at each of the individual properties, that it's being tied back to the overall strategy for the town land.
That's good,
And,
yes.
but I would say that we're getting close to the point where we should probably be thinking about how to take these things that were done in sort of, I'll say they were done in a way that was consistent with a forestry approach, 10 years ago, and I think like 90% of it, we'd have no problem with. And we should just zero in on the things that we need more information on to help answer these questions. But I know I'm sorry, you were, Sue, you're trying to get a word in edgewise here?
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to suggest that couldn't a goal be to leave some forests undisturbed?
Yes.
Yes.
Isn't that a goal?
I think we've said that.
Yes.
Yes. We're trying to figure out, I think one of the issues we have with these conversations is that usually, we just had it here again, we had different pieces that will talk about goals or tactics, and all these are good, things to say. The question is how do we collect them and start to move forward on pieces?
But here's, this is where I think we need to be a little bit more specific in the goals, other than those things that were in the front of all of them. Nowhere does it mention leaving some areas for potential old growth.
Yep, that's right.
It doesn't really specify succession age diversity. I mean, that's the outcome of some of the strategies. But I think we need to look again at those goals, and maybe this is something we'll do for next time. See if we can't circulate among ourselves, I don't know why my email's not working, what are some more specific strategies? Do we want these for, this particular property for more recreational trails? Do we want this one for old growth? Do we want this one for, does this one have, does another property have the potential for land management to encourage successional growth? I mean, those sorts of things, those are goals.
So so in order to start to make progress, how would you suggest we do this? Are we thinking that we should take each of the things that we have a forest management plan for, and then look for the deviations that we would change from that existing plan? Like if we added these two things to it, or these three major items, we don't have to nail them down into the verbiage, but say, we really are missing this part and this part. If we went through that, and then we came back with that kind of in a spreadsheet form, say, here are the 5 forestry parts we're thinking about, we need to add this part to it, would that help us?
It might be interesting in that regard, Charlie, to look at Belden Forest in particular, because that's a management plan that's in draft. So it's something we could get our hands on and play around with that and see how we might try to nudge that towards a final version that would meet our objectives better.
Yeah.
That might be a really good way to move forward, because we could work through that part of the process, have that part of the discussion, knowing that if we did that within Belden, we would still have to cycle back to how does it relate to everything else.
But it's a nice small piece, it's pretty defined,
Yep,
and I think, I agree, we could tackle that one.
yep,
And learn the process as we go,
yes, and it has different,
and bring up the challenge, the challenges
Challenges.
that I see in the sort of the generalities of these management plans, and bring it back down to a specific property.
so I like that idea a lot. So why don't we define a procedure for how we're going to do this between now and the next meeting, which is I think we've all got the Belden plan draft. Should we, should we cruise through? I mean, one thing to do is everyone could go in and add stuff, but I think that's kind of a complicated thing. You'll go through and have 5 zillion different changes. Do we first want to say, if you look at this thing, I think these are the parts that are missing?
I think a conceptual discussion is likely to be better than a kind of line-by-line thing.
That's what I would agree. So I think if people are.
I think
adding-
focus on the goals, because, engage in sound sustainable land stewardship, I think is pretty vague. I mean, yes, we do want to do that, but sort of think specifically for that property, what are we looking for?
So maybe if we do this, maybe if our action item is to say, what would we think the goals should be?
Yeah.
And then under the goals that are kind of missing, or we think there's not enough resolution, we then
Flush it out.
we then just say, here are a couple of the tactics that should be considered. If we come back and the next time we meet, we're gonna talk about that and try to get some consensus on those items. And I think what you'll find is we have lots of consensus on most, and there's 2 or 3 things that we're not, and those will be the ones we try to get more information about. And then I think if we did that next meeting and then we got some more information from specific people about some of the last ones, we might actually get through this in a
Yeah.
few meetings.
We might find that some of the goals, for instance, the goal for Belden Forest, generate income from sale of forest product, I don't see how that's even possible there.
Well, you've
So we
gotta-
might find that it's not even.
The reality, our reality is that if we don't sell the occasional tree from the property, we're not going to have the money to
It
do
might not be,
anything else.
that might be true, but it might not be true for every piece of property.
But
You got to sell some, there is not
Well,
money.
that's to assume that the management of those things is dependent on, the management of the forest is to cut them down and get money from them. It's like selling your furniture, it's just.
No, but for instance, you could, if, as we talk about a townwide plan, we might find, and I don't know anything about the forestry, but we might find that local taking of some trees in Onion Mountain might fund a couple of different things, and that would have, low value, that have a low impact system.
Or we might find in certain properties, because we've decided not to do a heck of a lot, we don't need a lot of money,
Absolutely.
which is a
So-
goal. And a strategy.
And-
So let's see, let's evaluate. So let's start with, thank you, let's start with Belden. And, how are you doing? All right. So I think that's best, because we can go around on this. But, I do think these are not specific enough, these goals. They're too,
Yeah, no, I think,
Are
I
maybe.
think, but they're well laid out at the level that they are. It's easy to get in there and say, these are the
We-
2 or 3 I have an issue with.
yeah.
And so I think we can basically do this by deviation. This is what we want to do
Let's try with
from
Belden. I
that.
agree, let's do that. Let's do that. All
So,
right.
so I think, so to be even more engineering-ish, I think we should, because we have 2 weeks until the next meeting, we should actually make some timelines. And that one of us should start and send it to, other people, and then we should kind of work our way through. So one of us should volunteer to take the first shot at this, and then send it out.
Mark, do we have any trouble with,
Yeah, I'd prefer that. So let's say, Charles, not to volunteer you take the stab at the first one. Email it to me,
Okay.
then that will go in the packet for the next meeting.
Thank
So
you.
it's discussed at the meeting, not emailing everyone.
Thank you.
But what you could do, obviously, once I get Charles's document and it's uploaded online, it's the same link for your Dropbox every meeting. You can go on there and if it's a Word document, start, editing and making comments on
Lovely.
the Word.
So it would be nice from just a, I don't know, efficiency standpoint, is if we could have the first go-around before the meeting. So is there a way where I can send it to you and they can go out, or does it have to be in the
Freedom of
meetings?
information.
Okay.
That would, once everyone starts emailing each other, it's considered a meeting. So you really can't. That's why
Okay. Okay.
it would have to come, but however, let's say Charles does draft one, I post it online, Marjorie then looks at it, makes suggestions, changes to it, emails me, and I tell everyone, hey, document isn't updated, go on there, check it out.
Yeah.
It's not coming as a commission
Across.
talking
Yeah.
to everyone.
Right, but.
It's kind of a,
But if we did that, if I made,
what I would prefer, if you do that, is
Different colors.
using Word, tracking it in Word, so that we can print that up for the meeting. Should someone from the public come to the meeting and want to see where the discussion has gone, there's a
track change.
change.
Yeah, so if we agree to the track, to using the track changes in the comments, just using that in the Word section, then you can keep track of all of it.
But as I suggested,
Yep, it still goes to me, you
I'll
first.
be the gatekeeper.
Good.
Yes.
Yeah, otherwise, the warden might let us use the mess hall for the meetings.
I would say, bring your toothbrush.
No, okay, that's fine. And that's one reason I didn't send out the other comments. So what I will do, because I have some time now, is I'll take the first shot at the Belden Woods packet.
Thank you.
And I will send it to you, Michael, and then you deal with it as needed.
I'll load it up to the Dropbox and inform everyone.
Okay. But I think if we can somehow have a discussion, if we can have at least everyone see it before I don't know, somehow, we'll see how to do it. Okay. If it takes long, it takes long. That's fine. I'm
And
fine
think
with that.
about the goals that
Right.
you would like to see, not to see, feel-good statements that are lovely, but kind of meaningless I think in the management plans. Think about specific goals that you would like to see for the forests.
Yeah, I think to the forester's credit, he didn't state them up in the sort of high level place. As you got through each of the individual parts, you could hear what he was talking about.
Yeah.
I still think that there were a couple places where some things were missing. You've kind of highlighted them. But I think in general, the deviations from this
Well,
are
the identification
small.
of the trees was brilliant, and the majority of the report. I mean, that was really where it was. The rest of it, I think, was pretty weak.
It was, I think it was the same.
It was the same for each of them, and
Yeah.
it was, I mean, they were pretty boilerplate, I thought. Okay, so we've got a plan for that. Excellent, thank you. All right,
Great for you.
I think we'll need it.
It's all
right.
part of the process.
All right. So the next thing on the agenda, I'm hoping to send Mike home early, he's sick with the flu.
It's not confirmed.
Sure sounds, so any other correspondence or,
Yes, please.
all right?
I have been asked by the Open Space Committee to solicit this commission's views on a question.
All right,
The question is this: the town proposes to do master plans for parks and for open space. And the Board of Selectmen have indeed put aside a couple of $100,000.
how did they get money for that? How did they get money for
Board of
that, but we don't have
Finance-
any money to do anything?
Board of Finance
Sorry.
gave it to them. They like plans better than they like trees.
All right, but that's
So-
just for the plan?
So, the question, please, the question is this. The Culture, Parks, and Recreation Commission has thought about this, and responsive to Mr. Toner's observation that other municipalities seem always to do them both subjects, parks and open space, in one master plan. That commission suggested that Simsbury's effort be a united effort of one master plan for parks and open space. This would require, were it to be done, going back to the Board of Selectmen to get them to acknowledge that one effort rather than two separate efforts would be okay with them. Nobody seems to think the Board of Selectmen cares one way or the other on this, but I could be wrong about that. But the question I'm being asked to bring to you is, do you think that it's okay to have parks and open space dealt with together in one master plan, or would you think it better to keep them separate?
Is that a general question for everyone?
That is a question for this body as a unit.
So, I'll just tell you what I think off the top, which is, I think that's a prescription for making sure it gets really, really long. Like in terms of the process. I think the goals are going to be so separate between those two that what you really want is a group that talks about the master plan, for one, their own master plan, and they talk at some point in time
Well,
between the two.
It's going to be an outside firm
That does it?
that does it. And it will probably be the same outside firm for both if there are two. So it will be kind of an intramural conversation if a conversation occurs.
The master plan as one single document, I know Parks and Rec sort of oversee the open space currently. which I don't find to be totally, I mean, I feel sorry for Jerry Toner that that's put upon him, that he has to oversee it's a huge job, and I just don't, it's sort of, because he has so much to do with the parks, the open space gets to be a second, a poor cousin to the first. So I agree, I don't think having the two together is particularly useful, because I think the parks, will get the attention and the open space will not.
Let me just bring one other item to your attention that I probably should have mentioned. That is, the first select woman pointed out that it's the same staff of roughly 4 people dealing with parks and open space. So it made sense to her that it all be together.
Let me put it this way. It's like having a conservation and an inland wetlands regulatory agency. The conservation often doesn't get a look in because you're dealing with the regulatory agency issues.
So Don, I'll take a step back. I did not realize that this was a hired out task when I first said this. I thought this was a citizens involvement task.
No, it will be expertized, and Mr. Shea, who is involved for the town, has looked at various firms and concluded that there are many regional firms quite capable of handling both subject matters simultaneously or separately.
So when we get the master plan, what do we do with it?
Well, the next thing I was going to say, after you make this decision,
Yeah.
I was going to point out that Mr. Toner, Mr. Shea would be very pleased to receive whatever comments and suggestions this commission would have about matters that should be dealt with in the master plan, and perhaps how they ought to be dealt with.
Okay, so you're kind of envisioning this as we contract with an outside expert firm to sort of somehow figure out the details. We will provide some input in the front of it to say, these are the details we might want to think about. And then, once we get the master plan back, in typical New England fashion, we will start to pick it apart and do other things to it, and then we'll do something with it.
My assumption is you would see something in a draft form as the process played out.
So I guess, given that, I'll rephrase it, and I think putting them together and having one group do that together is fine for me, because I think it's gonna come from the individual committees putting in the things we think about this, and then we're going to have a chance to, in the individual committees, to talk about it later.
And, it could give us an opportunity too to make some conservation-related recommendations for the parks part of the
What-
plan as well.
What would be
yes.
the
Which-
alternative?
The alternative would be 2 separate plans.
All right,
That we then.
within the same $200,000 budget?
Yes?
So we would still be able to put in our comments?
Collectively or individually, or you could have your brother-in-law send in his. They're glad to have whatever input is offered to them.
And what's the advantage of having them together,
Efficiency.
really?
I think what you'll have is, since you're having an outside firm doing it, you'll have them able to say, well, the parks are really interested. I think you'll be able to share information between them a little bit cleaner, in a cleaner system. It's clear that as a town, we have to deal with both of these. I think, if you really thought that the same group of people were not going to be able to give you, they're basically going to get 2 plans that they're going to work on, as separate entities, chapter 1 and chapter 2, or they're basically going to have have one plan that has, actually, I guess it's one plan that has chapter 1 and chapter 2, or two plans that have chapter 1 and chapter 1. I just see it as an efficiency item to take them together, but it all depends on how it's all set up.
But it's also the case that there being only one workforce and one management structure, it seems to me to make a certain amount of sense to have one plan that encompasses that finite pool of resources and thinks of all the relevant tasks as being somehow shared out on some priority basis by this finite pool of manpower.
Well, since we have one of the finite people here, I know, this has all fallen under Jerry Toner's. What, do you see if there's any possibility if we have it split into two groups that it might then fall into somebody else's domain rather than being lumped together? It's all going to just be the same?
No, but the only thing I would say, kind of to piggyback on Don's comment, is that, if you have it as one, you may have then a ability to stress some of the, let's say there's areas of open space owned by the town.
Overlap.
That may overlap parks, that may, really needs the TLC that they deserve versus a park that it may be the amount of maintenance that's required there could be cut back in order to reallot that manpower. Because, this document basically would be kind of a working guide for parks, recreation, culture and parks, kind of say, here's what we value, whether it's parks, whether it's open space, here's what we want to accomplish, whether it's manage it, et cetera.
Yeah,
And then also just things like, maybe it's also improvements to open space that
Would
now
there-
gets on the radar for your capital improvement budget, so,
Would there
trail
also be-
markers or benches or something.
Would there also
Sorry.
be chances, I know, right now, an awful lot of manpower and energy goes into the maintenance of some of the rough areas at the Simsbury Farms that never used to be managed, but now are managed. It's an incredible workload that goes, work effort that goes over there, and some things that may not be necessary. Would we have the opportunity to, but that's a park issue, that's,
Well, in that plan, yes, you would be able to comment as a commissioner, as a citizen, the concerns about that.
Yeah.
And say, I'd like
But
to see more.
one of where I'm going is the resources that are spent on that. There's a lot of management of the rough, but it's not the rough, it's just manicured off the edge. Whereas there's invasive species all along the edge of the
I don't
park.
think Mike Wallace would be too concerned if you told him to cut back on the mowing in order to use his
Manpower for something
manpower,
else.
either reduce the hours required to maintain the
Yeah.
course, or use them in a
Different
manner
way.
that may, because at the same time as the invasives are coming out on the course, it may encroach into certain areas of the course that hinder the playability of
Yeah,
certain holes.
yeah.
But doesn't that speak to?
Just combining them.
To combining them.
It could, yes.
Because I think.
No, I'm just trying to think this out.
Yeah, I think it speaks to combining early on. You can say, this is one of the things we want you to think about. All they're really gonna do is they're gonna basically echo back, they're gonna hear what the different commissions are telling them. They're gonna think about it, echo that back along with the details that go along with each of those questions.
Yeah, I would think they'd hear that whether it was combined or not.
Well-
I'm just worried that it all falls to Parks and Rec, and, that's my main concern.
But it could be a result of this plan is that there's not enough bodies to do all the tasks in Park and Rec. As kind of Don said earlier, there's 4 people who are maintaining the parks, and maybe you need 6. And that could be something that comes out of this plan and says,
That
based
would-
on the workload here and what we have as priorities, you need more people in order for Park and Recs to maintain the parks and the open space.
I
But,
think
I
we
mean,
know
just-
that
and that's
before,
not-
I think we sort of know that before we spend $200,000, but there we are. I really don't have an opinion. It's 6 of one, half a dozen another. We've got two studies or one. We're going to be commenting on both. I don't really feel strongly. Others agree, you can take back the,
I think it would be fine either way, but I would lean towards combining them.
I would combine them.
All right, a majority says combined.
that's fine.
Can you carry that message? Thank you. And please, think about what comments you will make. You don't have to wait for this group to meet again to do that. If you've got something,
When are the comments due? When
they're
is
not, well, they haven't hired the
firm
person
yet,
yet,
so,
or decided whether to combine
so
it
we're-
yet.
We'll work on our goals
But-
first.
But,
yeah.
well, if you are sitting around by the fire and you think about some worthwhile points, send them in to Jerry.
Yeah.
It's worth it, because as Jerry develops the RFQ for this project, you know, you at least have a say on what's the priorities now, rather than trying to convince the consultant at a later date, while, you know, the plans have already, they're starting in their infancy, growing, and now you're trying to kind of steer the ship,
All right, well, that's a different thing. That's a,
which I think is, and as Don kind of said, if you want to send a comment or thought over to Jerry, I think you'd appreciate that as he's developing the document.
I've already sent a page.
all right. Anything else? I'll just get my
That's all I got.
Well, so I just noticed that the Belden Forest plan that I have is in PDF format. We were talking about doing this in sort of a Word document.
I'll check if on the Google Drive it's in a Word document, otherwise I can email Eric Hansen and ask him for permission to
Okay.
access the Word document,
Okay.
if possible.
Thank you. All right, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move that.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. All right.
Say,
Have a
Dave,
good Thanksgiving,
there have
everyone.
been some improvements in the equipment they use. I went to the Connecticut Forest Forum.